Scott Pilgrim takes off, the graphic novel animation adaptation that most people are calling the bait and switch that doesn't work. Well, going through all 8 episodes, I have to say, it was pretty good. Due to the fact that the main Scott Pilgrim series has ended in a way that is pretty typical, the alternate rendition works because it's the same characters, yet the same attitudes with a different approach. So let's dive into that. Episode 1 deals with the main character Scott Pilgrim, played by Michael Cera, in 28 minutes of what the movie was in 2010. His hipster, mooching, sexually questionable, narcissistic, dead-end, precious little life, where he finds the girl of his dreams at a party played by Mary Elizabeth Winstead. After one date, Scott invites Ramona to see his band Sex Bomb at the Rocket, where during his set is challenged by Ramona's first evil ex-boyfriend, Matthew Patel. Now, if you remember in the live adaptation, Scott wins this fight pretty easily. That's not what happens here. Scott is believed to be dead, and Matthew Patel, played by Satya Bhabha, takes the win with confidence and overthrows Gideon Graves' League of Evil Exes, leaving Ramona to quest out not only for Scott, but to confront her past while also questioning herself in the process. Throughout the episodes, Ramona seeks out the exes that could have potentially kidnapped Scott. Each evil ex, like in the movie, has a vendetta on Scott, but mainly on Ramona, while Ramona gives the backstory on why she broke up with them. The main premise on the why: because Ramona, while attractive to certain men and female at that time, was emotionally immature in dealing with each of them. That, or it was the other way around. However, while Scott in the original rendition would destroy them to get to the final boss, Ramona confronts them to not only get answers, but deal with each ex according to how they broke up. This makes Ramona do some self-reflection on her relationship with Scott a lot more. Does Ramona truly like Scott, or is this another evil ex waiting to happen? While the exes are obsessed, vapid, pretentious, self-important, and obtuse as they are, shine a mirror on what Ramona has become after each interaction. The exes get even with Ramona and reflect on themselves as the episodes progress.
2 Scotts. Yikes. Nobody mentioned Sonic the Hedgehog.
Yeah, it's not what it looks like.
Episodes 7 and 8 deal with Scott Pilgrim being dragged into the future by his older self, mainly because older Scott was lonely and needed some company. The second objective was to get Scott to see how the future would be if he continued to date Ramona. Younger Scott, seeing his older self, makes him wonder not only of his future with Ramona, but life in general. In anxiety, younger Scott then gets older Wallace to take him to older Ramona, where she tells him about getting back to the past and making the screenplay so that young Scott and Ramona see each other in happier moments to stay together. Scott tells older Ramona that her younger self is caring for him just the same as he would for her, so it means something for him to go back in time to continue their relationship. While they travel back home, Knives talks to Scott about breaking up and being her own person without Scott around. While Ramona and Scott try to get their relationship rekindled, a force field is between them. While finding this out, the exes and Scott's party go to a musical about Scott, only to end up in an alternate universe to fight a very older and unstable Scott. Scott and company fight the elder Scott until elder Ramona comes out to put an end to the fight. Ramona says that Scott and her relationship was over 10 years ago, over a rough patch, and that Ramona ran away from it. Self-reflecting on this, she hugs her older self to put an end to everything and heal herself from running from a relationship when things get hard. When the fight is done, everyone returns to the play and the bombs Gideon set were disarmed. It ends with everyone moving in their own way, and Scott and Ramona leaving their relationship and future to chance.
Scott Pilgrim. So you got the girl. You gonna kiss her or what?
Make no mistake, this was a bait and switch, however a different approach to an already concluded story. In the graphic novel, Scott and Ramona have a rough patch and she disappears, leaving Scott alone to recollect on himself and his life. While others change around him, either for good or bad, months later he meets with Ramona again after a winter sabbatical and defeats Gideon after it was found out he created the League after a drunken rant. The graphic novel ended the same way for Scott and Ramona, leaving their relationship to chance. Albeit, Scott was the one fighting for Ramona's affection and relationship, while in this rendition, Ramona is doing the fighting. While certain colleagues of mine will say that it is, quote, female empowerment, feminist, and all the isms, I will take a step back and say, well, it's expected from the Scott Pilgrim franchise. I mean, come on.
Didn't you know? Todd's vegan.
sparks.
The characters are a satire to a 2010 young adult immature hipster lifestyle. The video game and TV show references reflect on a nostalgic, albeit nerdy pastime that most young adults hold on to, mainly because while being adults are kids at heart. What I do like about the miniseries is that Ramona confronts the exes she has and sparing their lives to grow in their own way versus Scott Pilgrim beating the crap out of him for her heart in a relationship. The point of the movie was that Scott Pilgrim, just like Ramona, would get into relationships because they were lonely people and couldn't grow. In a way, a toxic dependence relationship. Whereas in this rendition, Ramona isn't running away and confronting the past to move on and accepting that she can't run away from everything and everyone as she did with every relationship. While Scott, being obsessive about Ramona, can't worry too much about the future and leaves it to the future and trusts that Ramona has him as well. The story makes it so everyone self-reflects on the past and present relationships. Defeating people for the sake of someone is not realistic and wouldn't earn respect, while on the other hand, obsessing over someone is unhealthy and can lead to darker paths. Loneliness comes from moving in cowardice when the going gets tough, or when you yourself can't see yourself growing while everyone else around you does. Running away from problems only makes problems worse than facing them head on. Finally, confronting the problem is the answer to growing as a person and being a mature adult. The series is short in nature, but does what it needs to do: tell a different story. While I do agree calling it Scott Pilgrim and using the Scott Pilgrim name is a catch-22, it's akin to, say, Garfield minus Garfield. The plot may be different, but the characters are still the same. While the voice acting is a big draw for a few actors, some put their time and effort into certain characters, which had me in a mixed feeling sort of way. Getting the original cast was a great idea. In spite of that, how many of them were ecstatic to do the characters again? The animation was pretty good as it came from Science Saru, responsible for episodes of Adventure Time, Yuri Deco, and Star Wars Visions. While the music sequences came from various bands, known and unknown, to capture that punk shoegaze-esque hipster vibe from the 2010s, while also noting their nods to certain anime shows like Cowboy Bebop, Spirited Away, and Black Mongolian Chop Squad. Since finishing both parts of Scott Pilgrim, personally, anything after these two makes are null and void. The characters are done, the story is told, the characters are growing. Let the future decide it.